Good morning, everyone. It is 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Christy Gagne. I'm a program manager for Telehealth Rocks, and Telehealth Rocks is a federally funded program that focuses on school-based behavioral health. And we do this by working on social determinants, supporting school-based services, and telementoring trainings just like this one. We do have some of our Telehealth Rocks team members here today, Robert Stiles, Sage Brown, Sunita Lloyd, Chase Koob, and Haley Bell, and they're here to help. So you might see them putting items in the chat, responding to questions, or chiming in during the session. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you need something. We are glad that you're here to join this session today to talk about brain development and student behaviors, and we've just got a few notes for you as we get started. So this session is being recorded and we'll send it to you afterwards. Your microphones have been muted, but feel free to unmute to ask a question or to use the chat. And then importantly, please make sure your first and last name are visible on your Zoom screen so that we can track attendance. We don't have any disclosures, and everything presented today is evidence-based and currently accepted within the profession. And then after the session, we will share slides and recordings as soon as we can. Just give us a little bit of time to process those and we will send them out to your email. There is a pre-survey in your inbox and we would love your feedback. As a thank you for completing the survey, we're offering a brain model that will be mailed to you. It'll be mailed in late October, early November. So please complete the survey by October 8th to receive the model. And if you haven't received the survey yet, we will resend it after the session. Certificates of attendance will be tallied throughout the session and we'll send them after the series ends. And then if there's any questions you have that didn't get answered during the session, please feel free to email us. All right, I will hand it to our presenters, Stephanie and Evelyn. Thank you.
Well, it's great to be with you all this morning. I know Evelyn and I are excited to share this information with you today, especially about our amazing brain. So definitely I know we have a big group, always more fun to have a conversation than just have us kind of talk at you for a while. So definitely if you have comments, things that you want to share, we definitely encourage you to share them in the chat if you feel comfortable. We're definitely going to leave some space at the end too, just in case there's anyone who wants to share their experiences or kind of what's been working for them. Yeah, so today is the first of a couple different sessions that will occur in the next coming months, all on our amazing brain and child development and kind of how our brain plays a huge role. So yeah, Evelyn, do you have anything you want to add before we dive right into the material?
Well, I just want to thank everyone who's already completed the survey. It's really helped us kind of tailor some of what we're talking about today and what we hope to talk about in the next session.
Definitely. So next slide, please. So before we start jumping in, just wanted to get a temperature check and see if, just thinking about like, what is one thing that you hope to learn from this series? Doesn't have to be a huge thing to learn, maybe you're already an expert in this area, but in the chat box, if you could enter or type in one thing that you hope to learn from this series. Yes, I appreciate that, Whitney. Practical ways to work with kiddos, to share information about brains, strategies to teach kids, self-regulation, motivation. Yeah. Exactly. And something that we could also tell too from the surveys, for those of you who already filled them out, is that, could definitely get the sense that you all really do care about helping kiddos and kind of understanding and meeting them where they're at. And so I know kind of our hope for sharing this information with you too is to kind of help, reinforce all the good things that you're already doing and maybe kind of offer some slightly tweaked tools to kind of approach things a little bit differently, especially, helping kiddos learn more about how they learn. Okay. And we'll definitely, today we'll get into it too, but today's gonna be mostly more of like an overview of all the cool things that the brain does. And then in the next session, we'll definitely kind of dive deeper under the hood and figure out kind of all those things on the inside and what they do. All right. So lots of really awesome things that you all want to learn. That's great. Okay, next slide, please. So at the beginning of every of our kind of limited series, at the beginning, we always want to set an intention or an agenda together. And I think a lot of you in your roles already do this, and just want to kind of re-emphasize just how important and how strategic this actually is too. If you think about like anytime there's like a morning circle or kind of, you know, when you have your schedule on the wall for kiddos to kind of, right, see together what we're all doing today. You're actually doing a really cool brain technique, and you're helping. It's something that we actually tried when we teach cognitive training for people who have concussions or traumatic brain injuries, you know, in a range of that. We're trying to teach people what you're doing, which is how to set an agenda, how to kind of set a plan for the day. When we set a plan for the day, it actually helps our brains organize information. We can become more efficient learners, and in turn, we actually become better rememberers. We'll get into the nitty-gritty next time on like specifically on memory. But if you think about it, right, in order to, so if you think about our entire brain, within our brain, we have the front piece that's supposed to pay attention. Internally, we have like a filing cabinet, and in that filing cabinet, we have tons of memories. Well, when we look at something to try to remember it or learn it, and then to the filing cabinet, we have to like put labels on it or be able to actually kind of organize the information such that we're able to look in the filing cabinet and pull it back out eventually. So if, you know, imagine a world where we didn't set an agenda, or we didn't have a morning circle time, and all of a sudden you start kind of bombarding kiddos with information or bombarding yourself with information, you're asking your brain to try to do a lot of work, trying to figure out, how do I organize this? Why is it relevant? Why do I care? I'm now kind of in the moment trying to figure out how to label this information. And then if you can imagine, right, if I don't have good labels and a good organization strategy, when I try to file it and pull it back out of the filing cabinet of our memory, I might not be able to find it as efficiently either. So I know a lot of us kind of inherently do this, but just want to highlight that, you know, a lot of good comes from this intention setting or agenda setting. And so for us to kind of help you organize information for today, next slide, please. We kind of have our intentions that we're hoping to kind of set together. So, you know, one thing that we hope to kind of share with you today is that the brain doesn't just act in isolation or isolated units. It's a big symphony of circuits. When one thing happens in one spot, other things are happening in the other to kind of coordinate this giant structure that is our brain. We're going to chat with you a little bit about how knowing about the brain is a superpower, right? The more we know, the more we can kind of intellectualize or understand what kiddos are going through who we're working with. And also too, just to kind of acknowledge just how much the brain changes from childhood through adulthood. And also, just to add one more thing to kind of talk about today, you know, just how much stress and emotion impacts our brain. It impacts how efficiently it functions. It impacts a lot of different things. I know those are, it's a tall order. Those are lots of bullet points there, but to kind of help us all organize the information we're going to get today, this is kind of like the main pieces of the puzzle that we hope to highlight. Next slide, please. So knowing about the brain is truly a superpower, and it's pretty cool. You know, if you think about it, right, there's this idea of neuroplasticity, which means that our neurons are constantly kind of changing connections, strengthening connections. I don't know if you've heard the term kind of like neurons that fire together, wire together. So you think about like any kind of hiking path, right? The more we think a thought, the more we are doing things to get like in concert or together in a way. Those little brain areas actually kind of start firing together more frequently, and it creates a more well-worn path. So the cool thing to think about it is just you being here, attending with us in this virtual format, that, you know, you're listening to me talk, you're reading things in the chat, maybe you're doing something else at the same time as you're listening, but, you know, all those things right now, we're actually changing your brain. We're changing those connections right now as we're talking to you. So I think that's just a pretty cool thing to kind of think about, that every experience we're having throughout the day is something that's on a chemical neurobiological level is changing. So I think that's pretty cool to think about just how dynamic our brain is. You think about brains and how they function, right? Brains are social. We get a lot out of seeing what other people are doing, modeling, all those things. Our brains like to also search for patterns and meaning of things. If you think back to any time, maybe when you were a kiddo, I know for me, I definitely was a kid asking why a lot, right? And so if I kind of had a better sense of why we're doing something, it made more meaning or more sense as to why I was doing a certain action. Emotions are critical in learning, right? So these are all, again, surface level kind of super cool reasons as to why knowing about the brain is a superpower. If we're excited or motivated about something, right, it's maybe easier to learn. If we feel more stressed, sad, anxious, it's harder to learn. There's a reason for that, but there's a lot of systems that kind of come online and come offline when that's happening. The other thing too, just thinking about how awesome our brain is and all the connections that it has. There's a lot of stuff on the internet, a lot of stuff on Etsy, a lot of things that either, kind of distill or create their own version of information sources out there. And so just thinking about, when we want to learn more about the brain, being kind of cognizant or aware of the information sources that we're using. Is it coming from the CDC, the NIH, PBS, or even within your own organizations? Probably have some really good resources. But yeah, so just, important to kind of think about, right, in the big broad scheme of things, our brains are really cool. There's lots of dynamic things about them. We have this innate sense to want to find meaning in things. And then also too, just for ourselves, right, as we incorporate this more maybe in the classroom, we're kind of think about it holistically, just being mindful of, where the information sources are coming from. And we'll also share resources with you too. There's some really cool videos through the NIH about Jane the brain and how to talk to kiddos about stress and some of these kind of brain concepts too. All
I'll
right.
just add in, Stephanie,
Mhm.
that I think we're really aiming to reinforce the the things that have already been shared in the chat of why folks are here. The many good things that the diverse audience we have is already doing, and just ourselves bringing it back to the brain, so then it helps us use that same language with the children and families we're serving, to kind of help bring it back and explain a little bit through the brain. Really trying to talk about how there's a lot of plasticity, and there's lots of things that um, they're not set in stone, but more that idea that there's a lot of influence we all can have uh, with that. Um, I think too, where this is really helpful, how you described it. I think, we're also thinking about, it's not so much touchy feely, it's more, when we're looking at the brain, everything is geographically close. So when we're talking about learning, influencing feelings and influencing thoughts and influencing remembering, I think it's just, I think a lot, most of us are already doing that kind of naturally when we're talking with kids, but it kind of gives us some of the language about, oh, that's why that is, why all of those things influence each other, because just by looking at the amazing brain structure. So I'm just saying out loud, I think that's something folks will hear throughout this series and what we're trying to emphasize.
I appreciate you highlighting that. Yeah, I think the great thing about knowing about the brain, just to reiterate, is that we have language to kind of explain behaviors, right? Or explain things that we're seeing in the classroom. And it's not, it's probably more what we're seeing like behaviorally or those things, which we'll talk about more too. It's like, there's a lot of things that have to happen right in the brain in order to kind of, right, be within like an expected kind of behavioral realm. And so sometimes there's, things that aren't the kid's fault. It's more of like a product of just like stressors, environment, all these other things going on that can kind of, lead to kids exhibiting really problematic behaviors or acting out, regression, all that kind of stuff. And we'll definitely chat about that. But just wanted to, in the chat box, wondering if you all can let us know, like me personally, I look at the CDC, NIH, PBS, some stuff within my own organization to kind of get oriented or get information about the brain. But what resources do you all turn to in wanting to learn more about the brain? You have a tried and true one. Yeah, the NIMH. Yes, YouTube is awesome. Bruce Perry. Nice. Yes, I think you summed it up. Credible sites. Yeah. Yeah, I think something too, just to kind of think about is sometimes it's really frustrating when you look across resources and everyone has like a slightly, like we're all talking about the same thing, right? The brain. But sometimes some places have very specific kind of, right, like terms or verbiage that they're using, and it doesn't quite translate across all things. So I know for me personally, sometimes it's kind of taking like a 30,000 foot view, kind of, zooming out and thinking about like, okay, well, like what is the concept, right, they're trying to teach me? So it's not so much about the nuanced words, but more of the like the gist level kind of stuff. Yeah, and I appreciate the comment too that, yeah, there is, I can imagine it's hard to interact with a lot of kiddos who have a lot of really intense behavioral problems. And because of a lot of different things we're seeing, right, how it could feel like there is a choice component to it. But hopefully some of this information might help kind of explain, right, why things are happening. All right, next slide, please. So we have kind of an interactive thing. We have a poll, and the poll is going to ask you about how many neurons do you think humans have in their brain? It's okay to guess. I know it's early in the morning. Sure, if you haven't answered yet. So go ahead and see. All right. And so cool thing is that about 51% of you selected over 1 billion and over 100 billion, and over 100 billion is the correct answer in this fun fact. But could you imagine if you asked one of your kiddos, right, or just someone to count to that number, to over 100 billion? It would take about like over 31 years for a single individual just to, right, methodically keep counting. So that's a lot of neurons if you think about it. So pretty cool. Brains are awesome, but I'm biased. So thinking about if you take your two fists, right, put it together like you're gonna give a fist bump. Imagine this is your brain. And there's just like your brain, there's a right side, a left side, and lots of things in between. And where they connect is actually a really important structure called the corpus callosum, but we don't need to know that name. We just need to know that these things connect. Right side, left side connect. Cool thing about basic structure too, which I think kids think are cool, at least when I've talked to kids, they think it's cool. You might already know that our right side of our brain controls the left side of my body. The left side of my brain controls the right side of my body. So it's kind of cool to think about how things are like kind of crossed in a sense, right? Through this really, really important structure in the center. So we know we have kind of, right, opposite sides controlling opposite sides. That's why if you ever had have seen someone who's had like a stroke or some other medical thing happen to their brain, and maybe the doctors say it's on the left side, but then when you're looking at the person, you go, huh, but they can't use their right side. It's because of that crosstalk that's happening in our brains. Something that you probably have noticed of the kiddos that you work with too, that kind of like as they get older, right, they get more coordinated, whether that be like little fine motor movements, big motor movements, like kicking a ball, right? Like they get better kind of across time. And the reason why that is, there's something called myelin. Myelin is it's a like a fatty kind of sheathing that is over a lot of our nerves or neurons and the connections in our brain. It's really important because it insulates signal and it's easier to transmit signal. Think of it as like an electrical wire. If we have insulation around the electrical wire, it tends to work better in all kinds of conditions. Things that don't have the insulation maybe doesn't work as efficiently. So our brain's kind of set the same way. There's specific myelin sheathing to kind of help make our brains more efficient in how we do, in how just our brain doing things. Kiddos, when we're born, baby brains aren't myelinated all the way. And so it actually starts from the back and goes to the front. So you think about this front part is super important for planning and organizing. So it kind of makes sense that kids aren't the best planning and organizers for a while, because it's kind of like the last part of our brain to really become super connected. But that's again, right, that piece of neuroplasticity and growing connections. So with neuroplasticity, there's a lot of cool stuff. If you think about like the whole Dr. Dweck and the growth mindset or grit, I know when it first came out, it was a big thing to think about grit and grittiness and resilience. But all that you think about, right? We all call things different things, but at the core of it, right? What it's getting at is seeing things as a challenge, and by having that more of like a challenge mindset, even though it does take a lot of resilience and reserve to kind of see things that way all the time, by kind of modeling, right, how do we as humans kind of navigate speed bumps in day-to-day things or stressors, that actually helps set kiddos up for seeing things as a challenge and actually like growing connections. We'll also talk more in detail next session about it, but emotions also are really important for learning. And we'll get into more detail, but thinking about, there's a structure on the inside of our brain, so deep in the center, called the amygdala. The amygdala, it's next to our big memory system filing cabinet. And when our amygdala gets kind of activated, if we get startled, if we get scared, if we get upset, anxious, right, any kind of emotion, I like to think of our amygdala as kind of like a kid that's kicking the desk, right? Or it's kicking our filing cabinet of memory stuff. And when that kid, right, is kicking a desk in our classroom or making some kind of annoying sound, it's really hard to focus. And so the amygdala is kind of the same way. It kind of is, internally, it's irritating, right? It's kicking the desk inside our brain. And it makes learning kind of disruptive. So the sooner we can kind of acknowledge that the amygdala is a thing that can get set off, it's our entire center for like the fight, flight, freeze kind of reaction too. And so just being, aware of that, a lot of times too, when kids get upset, activated, that amygdala might be kind of interfering with their learning process or maybe choices that they're making. And again, just to, be mindful too, that when our amygdala is all lit up or it's doing things, that, our hippocampus, which is kind of this darker blue-purple structure or part of it, it looks kind of like a seahorse, but it's next to our amygdala, and it's really sensitive to, like its efficiency is kind of tied to, are we able to kind of lock in and learn, or am I distracted because I'm in a flight, fight, freeze mode? Next slide, please. All right. So you think about, right, even from as a little kiddo, there's a lot of changes going on. Myelination is occurring from the back to the front. A lot of the developmental milestones are also tied to like, right, expected brain growth things. We'll definitely send out, we have a lot of resources to share with you about Like the CDC has an entire developmental milestone tracking app to help parents, kiddos, all kind of like track milestones. I know from when I took a developmental class, they've changed the milestones just slightly. And so that's reflected in their new app. They also have access to free books, which I thought was pretty cool. And then also there's some PBS documentaries that kind of talk about just how sensitive the brain is, like early developmental brains are to different environments. But yeah, so just want to make sure you have those resources. There are so many, as you probably know, are familiar with, there's so many different little developmental milestones along the way. But I think kind of, again, zooming out, looking at the bigger gist or the bigger kind of pattern that we're looking for is that, the developmental milestones, there's lots of what we call like critical brain periods for kiddos. And there's a lot of them, but basically, like these critical periods are super important for sensory development, language, or even like second language acquisition too, attachment to caregivers and other, trusted adult figures. That those are all sensory motor development. These are all critical periods, and kiddos need certain experiences during these windows in order to be able to kind of develop these skills. Like I'm sure we've all seen, like the really depressing news stories, right? Or kind of like the one-offs that you're taught in school where, you hear about people who didn't have, because of, really horrific circumstances, didn't have access to language being spoken or didn't have, good attachment opportunities as a young kiddo. And then seeing, the aftermath or kind of like how people aren't able to read or write or aren't able to speak or aren't able to do these things. And that's because that critical window got missed. I know a lot of, there's a lot going on right now in the world. Coming off the heels of the pandemic and how that impacted just in terms of like stress for all of us and also especially for kiddos. But thinking about, a lot of, anytime there's a big stressor, kiddos can come back looking as if they're missing a milestone or looking as if they're delayed. And with that too, thinking about, anytime like when kiddos go to summer break and come back, right? Sometimes, we can kind of, maybe we can't name it, but qualitatively, we're kind of like, there's something different, right? Or like behaviorally something shifted. And I guess kind of like, even though it can be very distressing to see, right? Kiddos that we're working with closely have these behavioral shifts. Just thinking about, it's all about, so kids' brains are super elastic and they can catch up super easily on experiences, and just coming from it more of, maybe things weren't as efficient at home, but, it's all about the quality and quantity of some of these experiences that can help catch kids up. So kind of with that, just thinking about that, there's a lot of things that we can see, right, in the teaching realm and with kiddos that can be really distressing, but trying to remember that, there are, with our consistency in things, and quality of experiences, there's a lot of elasticity and we can help kids catch up. Next slide, please.
I might add in stuff on the one before. We'll for sure share the graphic. I think folks were interested in. I am the books are sharing a lot of great resources, but in the chat. So just sharing that we'll be sending those resources out at the end with some of the book recommendations and all of that. I think one exciting thing for me with the milestones is when I started training, we were really focused on 0 to 5, which of course it's still super important. And the milestone tracker and a lot of those resources just have great information, and we'll share all those resources. But it's been exciting that we now talk about milestones and think about it during childhood and adolescence and through early adulthood too. So just sharing that we'll be talking a little bit about that, and um, both with the growth of the brain and some of those exciting things from 0 to 5, but then some of the pruning process and some of um, the things that go along with more adolescent brain.
Hey, and thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's just amazing to think about all the shifts that our brain has to go from birth, toddlerhood, like kiddo, childhood, preteen, teen, adult. It is a lot of shifting going on. It's amazing to think about all the things. Um, yeah, so let's see. Also, ways that we can support developing brains. A lot of you are already doing this, which is awesome. But just, showing up, being there, even though we're not maybe with the kiddos 24/7, right? Just because you are a consistent, kind of constant source of support, or, if you want to even think of it as like, that person who, can show kind of that unconditional positive regard, right? No matter what, without judgment, you're going to be there for that person, is huge. Just knowing that there's like the stable person, right, in a lot of this ever-changing world is super helpful for developing brains. The intention setting piece, or thinking about our daily routines, or just any kind of routine, right, throughout the day. The fact that the kid is going to school, right, then that in of itself is a routine. So those are all supporting brain learning, right? The more our brains know what to expect, like what comes next, the easier it is to learn the information. And also it kind of helps calm down that amygdala too, from kicking the desk or table inside our heads. Modeling emotion regulation strategies. So things like, we have a slide on it, but like box breathing, the mind-body connection strategies, kind of talking through, right? Like when you yourself, like we all have days and that's okay, right? It's more about the sum of things that we're doing and not so much, right? Like in that moment to kind of think about all the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. But, we're human, and when we have a day, right, as best we can, right? Just kind of acknowledging what it is that we're experiencing, and maybe even talking through, depending on the developmental age, kind of, like for you, like what are you, how are you refocusing yourself? I think those are a lot of things that are super normalizing for kiddos to kind of hear about, like, oh, like, not everything's butterflies, unicorns, and rainbows. There's like like the realness of the world to it. And at the same time, right, it's like, oh, other people can feel frustrated too. And this is like a adaptive way, right, to kind of deal with frustration. Self-talk, every time we, kind of like report, right, to parents, like how kiddos are doing, or even like with our own self-talk, that also strengthens kiddos' self-talk and their own internal narrative too. So I think it's kind of cool that as adults, we have this unique ability to kind of help impart self-talk, or really functional, kind of self-narrative processes, for kiddos. So I think that's just like a cool thing of, our brains like patterns, and kiddo brains pick up on patterns real fast. So if you're someone who uses a lot of adaptive self-talk, those brains are going to absorb it. Again, too, approaching things as a challenge, and, getting kids to be curious, right, instead of defensive. Like when we get upset or when we are challenged with something, being able to model the, like, oh, like, I wonder why, right? Or I wonder why this is happening, or anything to kind of get curious. You're in a sense actually helping model critical thinking. And instead of getting stuck in the stressor, you're actually kind of sidestepping it and thinking around it. And I think that's a really cool skill for brains to have too. So you think about it, kiddo brains, because the front piece is kind of the last to, this big frontal area is the last to kind of create all of its intricate connections. It still develops up like in your 20s too. It's just amazing how much that frontal lobe develops. But kiddos, like, they're bad decision makers, they're bad at organization, they're bad at planning compared to adults, because that piece isn't fully on board yet. So the more we can kind of help model some of these thought processes, or kind of like, right, stop, think about what's going on, like some of these emotional regulation strategies can kind of help support, right, modeling, and also support some of these deficits, because these brains aren't quite developed in the same ways as ours yet.
I love
Next.
that. And I'll just add in, I think it really helps us say things that, like, mistakes and trial and error, they're not just inevitable, but they're essential to our brain development. That's part of it. And so just normalizing some of that for kids and helping them understand, no, that's a good thing. That's then how we're learning and helping our brain mold and develop, and it's all part of the process with the frontal lobe development.
Yeah, I appreciate sharing that. Also too, just to kind of highlight how much changing is happening. Like, so right from the poll, we know that there are like over 100 billion neurons that we're born with. And just think about all those neurons and connections, right? It's like, it's kind of like too many. So actually a huge process of kind of like brain development in the early stages too is just pruning connections, right? We have too many connections. We need to make the connections we have more efficient. So another way to think about it too is that with all these things, we're kind of helping brains learn how to become more efficient in things. Yeah, next slide, please. All right, so looking at how stress impacts the developing brain. So at the extreme of things, right? If someone is malnourished, doesn't have access to a safe home environment, right? You can imagine there's a lot of amygdala fight or flight freeze going on. When brains are stressed, whether that be physiologically, right? Not enough sleep, not enough food, water, no safe environment. That amygdala in the center of our brain is super active and it disrupts our ability to focus. We know kiddos aren't the best focusers or planners or organizers because of that frontal piece. But could you imagine if you already have maybe, right, you have a developing brain, maybe attentionally or planning, organizing, you're not the best at it because we all have different strengths. And then this amygdala kicks on, right? This light switch gets flipped. It's going to make learning even more difficult. And then also you yourself feel not motivated, feel super kind of agitated or irritable and might act out more. And it's more, because you're frustrated because you're seeing peers do certain things, but you can't get your body to do the same thing. So I know it's kind of the extreme end of things, right? But there's a lot of things, there's a lot of, stressors, physiological, mental, environmental, that all impact how well our brain develops. There's examples of this, from our perspective, working with kiddos, it could look like there's a delay in a milestone, or maybe when you saw them before summer break, right, they hit like a learning milestone, and then all of a sudden they come back and you're like, oh my gosh, this kid looks like they regress behaviorally because now maybe they're behaving more like a second grader than like a third or fourth grader. And, just to kind of highlight, like, behavioral regressions, and kind of learning regressions, sometimes they happen. It can happen in the face of really intense stressors, or just think about inconsistent environments, right? There's a lot of, being at home sometimes can be a lot more inconsistent than being in a school environment. And so these things can happen, but I think kind of the good news is that, right, kid brains are also super flexible. And so there's a lot of catching up that they can do if there is a delay or if there is some kind of behavioral shift from what you're used to seeing. And again, it doesn't have to do with, necessarily pure motivation or a choice to behave a certain way, right? But if a kiddo is already maybe a little bit dysregulated, their amygdala is turned on, we know they can't plan and organize as well as others. And then maybe what they see, how family units kind of interact with that too, right? Certain behaviors might be inadvertently reinforced at home versus at the school. So just kind of thinking about too, right? Like everyone's lived life context and what kind of contextual stressors are happening at home. And I feel like that a lot of times can help explain too why we're seeing shifts in milestones, right? Or just these behavioral regressions. And I know you all know this too, but just thinking broadly too about, right, kiddos' access to social determinants of health, toxins or substances in the home, just all those things are going to potentially negatively impact the brain. But the more structure and predictability we can insert into their lives while they're at school can help them bounce back faster. slide, please. The amygdala also gets activated and turns on that fight, flight, or freeze response. You know, any kind of trauma, grief, SDOH is social determinants of health. So things like access to food, housing, all those kind of things. But yeah, so anytime we feel sad, grief, right, we experience loss of any sort, whether it be loss of a relationship, a friendship, loss of a loved one, trauma, trauma, it could be capital T or little t, right? Trauma has lots of different shapes and forms. But the amygdala gets activated and turned on, and that, again, that frontal part gets more, it just doesn't work as efficiently at all. And so again, thinking back to, right, in order to make a memory or to pay attention to something, right, to then remember later, these kids might look kind of inattentive in class, or maybe they're acting out and then they don't remember things that you taught them, or remember a due date. Thinking about, right, like again, if the amygdala is in the center of my brain and it's next to my memory hippocampus filing cabinet, and when my amygdala gets activated, it starts kicking the filing cabinet, I'm now internally distracted, right? I can't give something my all, even if I look like I'm physically looking at something, I'm internally distracted. And we know for kids, right, their frontal lobes aren't developed, so they're already at a disadvantage. So asking someone to focus, pay attention, and to remember something can be a huge ask if that amygdala, right, is inside our brain kicking our memory filing cabinet. There's a lot of kids, right, who have ADHD or learning differences, or, right, we all have predispositions for different things and experience different things. And so say if a kid meets criteria for ADHD or an attentional difficulty, stress in a not well developed frontal lobe anyway is going to kind of compound like this this relative weakness, and make it even more difficult, right, for that kid to learn, to pay attention, to learn, to remember. And then if that kid notices that they're learning differently from peers, right, that can really impact like just how you feel about yourself too, right? And noticing maybe you're having a harder time than peers in doing things. Things that help, right? If you think about kiddos, they're not the best at planning and organizing. If like when I actually have like kids versus adults, draw like a really complex figure when I'm doing more of the kind of the cognitive brain testing of things. Adults, it's really interesting to see how adults can draw like super complex figures. They're good to go. Like 14, 15-year-olds, they have such a hard time because they're not as well developed with planning and organizing how they're going to draw things. If you think about like anytime when you have like kindergartners draw, right, things versus grade schoolers versus high schoolers, you can see like a progression, right, in people's skill. And part of that is fine motor stuff, right, a mechanical thing. But the other piece of it is actually it's frontal lobe based. It's that they are learning as they get older, right, skills and how to plan and organize before you start drawing. So I think that's just always interesting to think about too. But again, the more structure, the more right routine, the more agenda setting, helping kids learn how to impose a structure on information, that's going to just pay dividends across time, even as an adult, right? If you can learn early on how to place a structure on something, when you have stress, grief, trauma kind of creeping in, it's going to help set them up for success and have a scaffold or a template to kind of still be able to be functional despite these internal distractions kind of coming through. Next slide, please. So calming our brains is super important. And calming our brains is basically, I like to think of it as like, so say if our amygdala is activated, right? It's kicking the memory filing cabinet internally, we're internally distracted. How can we get ourselves focus on something else, right? Because a lot of times when we are in our heads, we're focused on how distracted we are and we're missing a lot of things in our environment. So being able to shift back to, okay, well, there's box breathing. There's, breathing in for 4 seconds, holding 4 seconds, breathing out 4 seconds, and holding 4 seconds. doing that, not only is it physiologically calming, but it's also getting us to focus on other things that are besides, right, the internal distraction or whatever is setting off our amygdala. A lot more mind-body connection strategies, the more we can kind of infuse that, everything from like alligator breaths to, right, like kind of be able to be an observer and notice leaves on a stream, or notice the crunching of leaves as we're walking, or the sound of our feet on a path. These are, again, all great ways. They're not distraction, but you are teaching kiddos and yourself how to intentionally shift your attention away from the internal distraction and towards something else. So the more we can practice that intentional switching, the more it's helpful, right, for kiddos and trying to intentionally shift attention someplace.
Stephanie, I was going to add in, Haley helped share the hand model of the brain just a minute ago. So it really complements what you just shared here, where it's the idea that just like panic can run through a herd, calm can run through a herd. So that video clip is super helpful, kind of describing how if we're doing calming our brains, it can really be mirrored in the children that we're working with.
Yeah, and just like I appreciate that, and also one of the comments in the chat that, right, we can, like, I totally hear you in terms of, right, we can't control the stress coming into the classroom because there's gonna be so many different things coming at us. It does take a long time, right, to self-regulate. But the cool, whether you want to think of it as a cool thing, I think it's a cool thing that, right, in that space, even though I know it's frustrating, right, because you maybe have other ideas or plans or things that you want to help teach the kids, and it takes up a huge, it's like a huge time suck in a sense, right, to all the emotional regulation and helping kids kind of recenter and refocus. But the cool thing is that no matter what chaos that kid's bringing in from home, that kid on a certain level knows that in that classroom it's safe and it's going to be calm, right? Or it's a space to where they're able to self-regulate. And again, I know it's super frustrating to kind of deal with those kids in the moment, but sometimes it's more of like the bigger, right? Like the bigger picture, like the sum of all these things of, over time, this was a safe space to kind of help where the kiddo is hopefully able to kind of help downshift or downregulate that internal response. So good job doing the hard work, because that is hard work to do. Next slide, please. So again, super important, right, with all this too, to kind of be able to reflect and go, how am I also supporting my own brain? A lot of times, right, when we are showing someone how to self-regulate, right, we ourselves are also self-regulating, which is kind of cool, hooray for mirror neurons. But it's also, just think about in that example too that you shared, which I appreciated, that, right, to be the person who has to receive the chaos or the stress coming into the classroom every day, or seeing all these different stressors, right, it really does impact us, and it takes a lot of resilience, if I could use the term, meaning that you have to be able to shift constantly, right, from kind of putting out one fire to the next to the next. And we have a unique ability to be able to kind of gut the stress, right, and do the thing that has to be done. But, also important to kind of reflect on, well, by gutting the stress and being able to push down my own stuff so I can help take care of the kiddo, right? Like what's being exchanged, right? Is it physical health? Is it my own mental health? Am I feeling burned out? Is it causing stress, grief, fatigue? Like these are all human experiences, but thinking about, how can we incorporate some of these own brain behaviors into our own day such that we can help support our own mind. So thinking about, I know we are asked to multitask, right, in a lot of things that we do, but thinking about, the more we multitask when I'm already stressed, the more fatigued I feel. So thinking about, okay, if there is a way, could I schedule my day such that I try to chunk things together, such that I'm not switching as much, right, from one to the next to the next to the next. If not, okay, if that's a completely unrealistic thing in this moment, then, are there ways I can try to structure my day such that I am ahead of time imposing a structure into how I'm going to organize things or get things done. And then in the moment, I'm not having to try to figure out, what do I do with this information, right? If my amygdala is already activated. And also thinking too, right, like what are things that fill my cup up or recharge my battery? I always think about thinking about my phone, and as soon as that little battery bar turns red, I personally feel really stressed, right? And I try to find the charging cable for it. So thinking about, do we have warning signs for ourselves? Maybe it's in how we think, feel, our behaviors, right? Any of those things. That's kind of our tell for, oh, my body, my brain is getting a little bit fatigued right now. And maybe it's time to, right, take a structured break versus trying to persevere through and running my battery or just depleting it. So in this series too, we'll definitely try to highlight other ways that we can support our brain, because we can't pour from an empty cup. And next slide, please. So just like intention setting, right? Kind of setting the organization and structure of things at the beginning is super important, so we can try to organize the information that we're about to learn. And also summarizing at the end, or being able to pull out at least one thing that I want to put into practice, kind of helps actually encode and solidify information. And this will make more sense when we talk about memory specifically. Excuse me. So in the chat box, if you want to add, what is one thing that you're going to put into practice until we meet next? These are some examples. It could be, just keep on doing what I'm doing. It could be, maybe I'm going to figure out what other routines I can implement in my classroom or my day. Maybe I'm going to intentionally use an organization strategy when learning. Or maybe try a strategy to try to calm down my brain or teach a fun fact about the brain. Okay, these are all good things. Yeah, I like what I'm seeing. Limit multitasking, keep doing what you're doing. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. Box breathing, trying to calm brain, model the self-talk. Yeah, this is awesome. Hey, you all are awesome. But yeah, just thinking about too, there's a lot of growing that our brain does from birth to adult. And just, I think coming at it from a lens of, there's actual physiological barriers that kind of limit what kids can do and how efficiently they do it. Like they can't do it at an adult level yet. And being aware of the role, right, that internal distraction will play too is just huge to remind ourselves of. Setting boundaries, that is a good one. Next slide, please. So definitely, just want to give some space if you have any questions or things that I know some of you I saw in the chat were sharing resources, which is great. Or other things that you want to share, please definitely feel free to add now or share, or we can give you some space to chat. You're also more than welcome to email us too, if you have thoughts later, because I know sometimes when you kind of think about things later, things pop into your mind.
Hey, Stephanie. This is
Hey.
Brad from Chase. I've seen you present a couple times and it's always so interesting. So thank you again for today.
I'm glad to be here.
I had a question, I guess, relative to something you said towards the beginning, which was around neuroplasticity and the fact that less stress kind of helps us to be more equipped and excited to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And our program serves justice-involved youth, youth in foster care, youth that have experienced a lot of trauma. And they're sent to us right after these situations with the expectation that they're going to come learn things like positive self-talk and emotional regulation. When they're in a place where they're probably their brain, their amygdala is firing, they're not probably ready. Is there like a ideal time frame for recovery from someone so that they're in a place to be ready to learn some of those things?
That's a good question. I think the literature is still out in terms of a specific time frame. Because I've seen like some, I know different population than kiddos, but like with people who kind of like adults who undergo consistent, persistent like trauma stressors, that when it comes to like, you know, trauma treatment, they're like, well, you got to start somewhere, and there's always going to be life, like the attitude is like life things will always happen. I totally feel for you in terms of like having these kiddos come in, and right, there's a lot of things kind of against them in terms of how, you know, just it's a lot, right? To expect a kiddo to be able to, okay, now I'm in a different environment, we'll just ignore the rest of everything that's happening and we'll just, right, somehow focus. I know some of the literature kind of points to like trying to, you know, maybe instead of focusing on the learning, trying to get it, like getting curious about like, what is it that you like to do? Just like, you know, something like what brings me joy. So it's almost like you're doing kind of a values sort, or looking at values and kind of what gets them going. Because there might be a way to kind of tie in like, oh, like I really want to do X, Y, Z, and then be able to somehow scaffold, right? We have to do this learning thing that might not be as fun because it's going to help you get to this different goal, or aligns with kind of this North Star idea. I've seen that to be helpful sometimes.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good question. Yeah.
Stephanie, there's a question in the chat on how can we get buy-in from teachers?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess buy-in about brain behaviors in general, or I guess my question has more questions. But I think, right, it's not a lot of stuff that teachers are doing, right? We're not asking teachers to change what they're doing, but more of maybe adopt a slightly different like lens, if that makes sense. So you think about like classroom routine. I feel like all the classrooms that I visited, there's always some kind of routine, like schedule component, right? So maybe there's a way to kind of highlight the things that are awesome, that are already there and supportive. And maybe there's a way to kind of get curious, or right, even kind of the same thing like with Brad's population, like right, kind of like what gets them going, like what motivates them. Maybe there's a way to kind of tie in that piece, right, to try to elicit some kind of change or buy-in in terms of what you're trying to do.
I think with that, you can for sure catch the good, just like all humans like to hear what they're doing is awesome. So with whichever audience, I don't mean to pick on teachers, it could be anyone, just catching, I love that assignment you just described. It really nails some of the best brain principles, or, maybe just small things and seeds to weave in about how what that a person is doing that is already really helping child's brain growth and development. Instead of, I think that's what we're hoping and want to learn from you all, how you have talked with colleagues from different professions, kind of to share and get folks excited about the brain ideas. So more to come on that, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and thanks for clarifying, Angie, too, that I think we can definitely talk a lot more about that next session, but to come up with some more ideas together. But I think, yeah, just the same thing like Evelyn said, like trying to highlight the good that's happening, right? Because all things aren't bad, but like, what's the good stuff? And then maybe even validating, right? I can understand how kid behavior looks like it's a choice, right? And maybe for some people you could say, yeah, they are making a choice, right? A behavioral choice, because there's always choice points. And it's like the root of the behavior, right? Or what function does it serve? It's because of all these stressors and a brain that's not quite fully formed online yet, kind of thing. So there might be a way to kind of do the yes and kind of component.
I think that resonates with one of the other questions, where with actions we can have consequences, and talking about it being learning, both things can go together, that we can be sympathetic and supportive and have a consequence too.
Yeah, we're definitely here for additional questions if you want to email us. I know we're hitting right at that hour mark. But let's see, next slide. We'll go to our key takeaways. We changed your brain today. Yay, good job being here. Changing brain is awesome. stress negatively impacts milestones and learning, and the things that you're doing, having supportive classrooms, routine, limiting multitasking, help kiddos and help us. Next slide. Thanks again for everyone who completed the pre-survey. If you'd still like to complete it, we sent it out again. And everyone who completes the brain by 10/8 can get a nifty model. And then next slide, please. We'll see you in November. We'll talk more about the internal stuff of what's happening on the inside, specifically with emotions, attentions, and how that impacts all the things.